Okay, good evening, everyone. I would like to call tonight's Committee of the Whole to order, and as we do so, I do wish to recognize that we are meeting tonight on Sooke traditional territory. We wish to acknowledge both their government as well as their long connection to the lands and seas that surround us. So, Council, we are in Committee of the Whole tonight, so as we approve the agenda, there's a few items that I would like you to consider. First off is the inclusion of some supplementary information. And secondly, our delegation has requested a presentation at tonight's Committee of the Whole and has requested 10 minutes. And so it just allow for a bit more time. So I'd like to ask Council to approve that extension so that we don't interrupt the presentation partway through. Moved by Councillor Beddoes, and since we are in Committee of the Whole, there's no seconder. So we'll just call the question on the agenda as it's been amended. All those in favor? Opposed? And that's carried unanimously. So that puts us right into delegations. For the Freedom Mobile 4.1, and I understand Pascal Dubé? Or Dean? Okay. So welcome, Dean Price. Yes. And if you could please turn on the microphone, and that way anyone that's dialed into the webcast can also pick this up.
Okay. All right, good evening, Your Worship, Council. Thank you very much for having me, or us. This is really just meant to be kind of a snapshot, more of an open forum for us to be able to kind of discuss the Freedom Mobile project, kind of where it is, a little bit about where it came from, but really just kind of give you some context, because I know really the only time you ever see Freedom Mobile is when you get an application for a site. So this is hopefully to put a little bit of meat on the bones. So without further ado, maybe with a little further ado. So for those that don't know me, before we start, I'm Dean Price. I am a VP within Shaw, and I'm the General Manager for Freedom Mobile for Western Canada. I look after all of our stores, and I have a certain sort of dotted line responsibility for all aspects that go on in BC and Alberta. With me today, before we start too, is Carlos Montoya, who's over there. Carlos is an engineer, and he's responsible for all the engineering efforts for Western Canada. Really the guys that kind of look at sites, figure out what's the right sort of, the right mix, where it goes, all that sort of thing. And also Pascal Dubé, and Pascal is the real estate guy. So basically, Carlos says, we need some kind of a site here, and Pascal goes and tries to figure out how to find a home for it. So these guys are really the experts in the development of a network as far as Western Canada. So a quick bit of background. Freedom previously Wind's been around since about 2009. And as you know, this federal government and the previous governments have said, one of the problems we have in Canada is cell phone prices just too much. We need some competition. So you can see on the right, there's a bit of an eye chart there, but this was an ISED sponsored study. And ISED, just everyone understands that's Industry Canada with the new acronym. So ISED, amongst many other studies, pulled this one out. It basically shows the average price of a smartphone in Canada as of last year is about $71 just for a plan, which is quite high if you look at the US. There's some reasons for it, some justification, but generally speaking, the feeling was it was more of an oligopoly, and it needed some real competition. So 2009, they opened up the opportunity, kind of set the conditions for new entrants to come in. So if you had the capital, you had the expertise, and you had the stomach, you could come in and build a cell phone company. So a few did. The only one that's still around today is Wind. Everyone else was actually acquired by the incumbents, and Wind turned into Freedom. So one of the other things that happened too that's important to note is if you're thinking to yourself, well, I go down to the mall and I see all sorts of stores. There's Fido, Koodo, Virgin, Lucky, Public Mobile, Chatter. They're actually all owned by Bell Telus Rogers. So that's not a thing. They're not trying to hide it. It's wide open, but that is a fact. So there really is right now in BC, Ontario, and Alberta, there's only one fourth player right now that's Freedom. The other provinces all have a legitimate fourth player, and therefore the markets are seen to have enough competition to be sustainable, but also and keep the cost down at the same time. So what that means for us is we have to build our own network, which is the big part. So in 2016, Shaw purchased Freedom at the time for, and this is public record, $1.6 billion, and the vast majority of that was actually, of the valuation was the spectrum. So spectrum is air, it's just frequency, as you know. But it's the critical aspect to it. So this is why it took a ton of capital for the different companies to set this up. One of the problems is if you don't have spectrum, you can't build a cell phone company. So Shaw has actually invested an additional $2 billion since they acquired Freedom, just in the ability to try to get enough spectrum to be legitimate. 30 years ago, Bell, Telus, and Rogers were fortunate. The government didn't know they could actually monetize spectrum, and they got it for free, which is great. They kind of had that realization later on, and they've made billions and billions from being able to do it. So that's kind of where we are now. So access to spectrum for us from a challenge perspective is pretty heavy, but Shaw has the long view of things and the deep pockets and is willing to fund it. Just a couple months ago, they actually committed another $500 million in spectrum acquisition. So one of the challenges that we have to deal with is getting it, but we're handling that. That's good. When it comes to building a network after you've got air, it's finding the right sort of sites, and that's where these guys come in. It kind of starts off, someone like me says, okay, I want to cover Victoria or Kamloops or Kelowna, or very soon Nanaimo. So I draw a big circle on a map and say, this is the area that I want covered. These guys then take it and say, okay, in order to do that, this is kind of how we have to lay out all of the sites, the antennas. Carlos and his guys then hand that off to Pascal. Pascal says, okay, now we've got to run around and find landlords, and we've got to figure out how to get power to it and everything else. So it's a very difficult job. And if you picture kind of an empty map with a bunch of circles on it, it's not too bad for the first few because they've got enough option, I would say, to be able to go in there and say, well, if this hill doesn't work or that building, we can use that one or that one. But as the puzzle starts to fill in, it gets a lot more complicated. And you'll see when I show a couple maps later, and Sooke's a good example of that. Once you've got, if you're going to do 10 sites and you've got 9 of them done, that 10th one, it doesn't have a lot of room. It kind of has to, in order to fit with the others, be in a fairly specific space. So their job gets a lot harder as the network gets built out more and more. So finding the right sort of sites and then suitable landlords is always a challenge. And then the last part I would say that makes it complicated is negative perceptions in and around sites. So aesthetics for sure. Nobody likes the look of a cell site. We've got some pretty creative ways of masking it. There's some in Sooke that I've seen, some not. You've seen the monopine, and they're great. They do drive up the cost, and it's a factor we have to consider. So when we look at doing a monopine, for instance, you can probably double or triple the cost of building out a tower. And when we do kind of a return on investment, we look at covering a town like Sooke or any other city. We say, okay, how many sites, what's the average cost, and then we figure out what's a reasonable return on investment. And then it's amortized over quite a long period of time. Because this is a long view game. There's certainly nobody making any money in 2 or 3 years on this. So aesthetics is something that we battle, but we always try to find that compromise between building efficiently versus making it not look like a cell tower or an antenna. Property values seems to come up enough. I would say, and you all I think are aware of this, that ISED's perspective on this is that it should not be considered a factor negatively or positively in an application. It doesn't matter what I think on that, but I would say that it's very different today than it was 5 years ago. If you put up a tower 5 years ago, it was convenient and it was nice to have access to it, but it was kind of like, it's a bit of an eyesore over there, I don't really want it, but I kind of like having email. Now I would suggest that connectivity is becoming an essential service. It's not a nice to have, at least for the majority of the community. And I would say as well that when we roll out 5G and Internet of Things, it's going to become even more important. So property values is something that I think is often comes up. It's really always one of these 3 buckets, but I think it's going to become a lot less and less of an issue as we go forward. And the last one is health. It's almost like the dirty word. I don't want to talk about it, but everyone knows it's Health Canada's Safety Code 6 is our governing body on that. And our job is to meet or exceed Safety Code 6. And that's the party line. The truth is we do everything we can to not only exceed Safety Code 6, but to crush it and to make it so that it is so not an issue that we never have to have that awkward conversation. Is it 90% of or 98% of? We try to get it so that it's so far away that it makes the whole conversation go away. I was thinking on the way over, it's kind of, if I was in a different industry and I was building a bridge and I said, my what's called earthquake structure code says I have to build to X and I build to 2X, I'm a rock star. But it's funny, in this industry, you have to exceed so much to be seen as credible. So in fact, the last site that was presented, and this is actually not uncommon with a lot of our rural sites, exceeded Safety Code 6 by a factor of 1,000. So the thing I would leave you with is whether or not you actually have confidence in Safety Code 6 as a legitimate, or not legitimate, that's not true, but whether you believe it or not, I would just ask to look at how much we exceed it by, and hopefully that would alleviate some of the concerns that the constituents have, as well as yourselves, about, we're not shaving the ice cube on this. It so far exceeds that we want to make it again so it's not an issue. So those are the challenges we have. Here's the good stuff. And I'll start with tower use. If we put up an actual tower as opposed to an antenna, first thing is, and we make this known to the municipality, you have access to it for anything, whether it's emergency services, whether it's any sort of non-profit body that needs access to it, we will provide that free of charge. And that's kind of a standing offer. Most carriers, I think, would suggest that. Everything that I want to do is, when we actually looked at Sooke, I wanted the build to be good. So not spotty, not just enough to say we have coverage to really mean it. So you'll see in the maps that we're really trying to push this. We're trying to make it so that you have good coverage everywhere for today and for tomorrow, and also make sure that connector between Sooke and Langford is solid. So no drops between Connie Road and West Coast Tire, which I have every single day. So that's at least aspirationally, that's what we're going after, and that's the way we've designed the build, is to make sure that if we're going to do it, we're going to do it properly. Employment, Shaw and Freedom together do employ about 500 across Greater Victoria and about 14 from Sooke, which is not huge, but it's not insignificant. It's a good size, I think, and it's nice. We don't have a store out here. I don't know if that's in the cards for the next couple of years. It doesn't really justify it yet, but we actually have folks who live in Sooke who work at the stores, who work at the Uptown call center as well. And probably the big thing here is bill savings. This is the most important thing for folks. Freedom is known as having the best value. It's because we've built our own network and we've come from the ground up. It's truly a disruptive company in that way. So looking at sort of a general penetration rate coupled with our normal share of the market, it's really not a stretch to be able to say that the region as a whole, when we're up to speed, could be saving about $2 million individually. So that's hundreds or thousands of dollars per household on cell phone bills. Part of that is just the cost of plans, and part of it is no overage fees. That's, if no other reason, I think that's why the majority of Sooke is probably going to be excited once we have a more fulsome rollout. Okay, very quickly, I just want to show you the coverage. This is today. So the two little dots on the left, the one that's in the middle is actually right at the Legion. It's just a little rooftop. And the one on the further left is out in the industrial park. The pink is the coverage that we'd say is good coverage. The brownish is kind of meh, and I wouldn't really count on it. And just as a point of reference, the one on the far right is the furthest tower we have to the west coming from Victoria, so that's around the Sooke Hill. It's up in the hills there. So my job is to join really this Sooke all the way to that dot on the left. So right today, without you guys doing anything, this is what it is. In 2 months, 3 months, the little circles I put on, those are the new sites that are coming online. Those are already approved. They're in construction right now, and they'll come on. That's really going to help. It's going to see a marked difference from today between that. Like, I'm excited about that because it's probably going to double or triple the coverage. And then really final build, this is kind of where the rubber meets the road. You'll see that on the furthest west, we're going to have a site as far west as the intersection of Kemp Lake Road and West Coast Road, which means that coverage will be pushed a lot further west than we normally have today with existing coverage. And all the way through, like I said, as a connector. The blue circle is the only site that is not approved. It's more of a marker than an individual spot. As I promised last time, when we came back, we would look at alternatives to the one that was given on concurrence, and we are, and that's what these guys are doing. So they're not ready to present today, of course, but their commitment is to be able to come back and find a way that meets the mail that still allows that connector to provide that safe, secure route all the way to Langford. And that's all I have. I'm sorry I went over a few seconds.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Price. The question I have is, with the expanded coverage, like right now, if you're, say, at the Harbour House or on Whiffen Spit or even at the Baptist Church or in that area, your cell phone starts roaming. So I'm with TELUS and it starts to roam there. And then there's the odd time I've been charged with long distance, and sometimes they've reversed it. But generally, as a rule, they will say that they won't. Would this then remove that roaming problem? Like if a resident was on Freedom, would they still roam there? Because I heard it's always because you're near the water, but... I'm physically not in the U.S., so I don't want to pay long distance, and I don't feel I should have to just because I live near water.
And you shouldn't. So first of all, every carrier has to reverse the charges. They have no choice, actually. But it's a pain, for sure. So our goal is to do that. It's by far the most difficult area to cover, and these guys can tell you, is down by there because there's nowhere good to put a site. And because it's on the downhill slope facing the water, it's kind of blocked out, because if you picture line of sight transmission, it's kind of blocked out. However, we are hopeful that with the little dot, I'm going to try this way. You can't see it anyway. It doesn't matter what I put this on. The one in East Sooke Park, what we're really hoping on is that's on a nice high feature, and that's actually the one that we're we're hopeful that when it beams in, it will provide some coverage there. That being said, there will be spots that the U.S. carriers will probably pick up, and everyone's going to suffer from this. What we do offer, though, specifically in Victoria, is a plan that includes U.S. roaming for part of the plan, and it's basically the same price. So that's how we've gotten around it, and my argument was exactly the same thing, is we get what's called in-footprint roaming, so you're in your own coverage area, but getting charged roaming charges, so it would make all that go away. You just have to have the right plan, and we just make sure that customers know about that plan, that it's included.
So in this case, though, that's happening because the user, say myself or another resident, is just physically away from where the last carriers.
As the signal strength goes down, theirs is stronger and it will pick up. It's the same thing even roaming between Freedom and TELUS or any other carrier. As your signal drops off, the other one will grab.
I see. Okay.
So we're definitely trying to hit those. There will be a couple of sticky spots, but you can see just from the overlay of sites, we've probably got the most robust overlay of sites right now of anybody. That's because I really wanted to do it right. The other option down the road is if we do find little spots, we call them black spots. There are other technologies like small cells where we can put in a very small sort of transmission and reception device that's very innocuous, like on a telephone pole or something, that will help block this. The problem is they don't have a lot of diameter of coverage.
Okay, got it. Okay, questions or comments from members of council? Councillor Bateman.
Yeah, so we put you through some hoops here in Sooke. I think back in January we rejected the Glynns Lake location with a 5-0 vote, and we had a chamber full of people, and whether you're 1,000 times or 1,000,000 times below the Code 6 standards, people are going to fear cell phones, or at least this group did. And I guess it's good to hear that Mr. Dubé is seeking a location that perhaps is not that exact location, perhaps further up in the hills, or I know these line of sight issues are critical. And the one thing we didn't hear that night back in January was your whole point around competition, and I don't believe we did. And I see that you're currently offering 10 gigabytes for $50 a month, and you're in fact encouraging competitors to get in the game. I see Rogers is coming forward with a new plan, $75 for 10 gigabytes, in recognition that the competition. So I look forward to your next I assume when do you have a timeline for a presentation for this the missing link in your system?
So I don't want to put Pascal on the spot, but I know he's working with a landlord. I'm putting him on the spot. He's working with a landlord right now. We are really seriously trying to find an alternative. As I was trying to allude to, his option space is so tiny now because the rest of the network is all built around it. It's power and access. So there's lots of great hills, but there's no power to them. There's no roads up there. So it really forces his hand a bit. We have a couple of options. Fingers crossed. I really hope it works out if we can find a deal there. The other thing I have to say too is, in so doing, we had one site that was going to cover everything before. This will probably not, which means we have to deal with the city of Metchosin, the municipality of Metchosin, in order to try to get another site further down. So it's going to drag the process out a little bit more, but that's okay. If that's what it takes to kind of get things through, then that's what we'll do. We're this far along; we're not stopping now.
So I think we have something in the order of 50 of these smaller transmitters on telephone poles in the region, and you don't need our approval for that, do you?
We do not.
Oh, you do? You do?
We do not.
Oh, you do
Correct.
not? No, okay. All right.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And just so I understand, the Freedom and Shaw work together. This is a very layperson's question, so to forgive my technological ignorance on this. But the internet runs through the cable lines, and then but the cell signal runs from tower to tower, so they are completely separate systems. Completely.
Exactly.
Like one
Today they
doesn't
are.
rely on the other.
That's right. Now, the future could hold, and I think it's actually starting to merge that way, where at some point cable, which turned into fiber, is going to probably disappear and it will all be done wirelessly. But today, that is exactly correct. They are two separate things. Now, you can get a Wi-Fi signal from phone too. That's partly why we run the $10 or the $50 10 gig plans. We actually ran plans that have no phone at all because there's so many young people that just don't actually want to use a telephone anymore for a telephone, so they use it as a Wi-Fi device for internet.
Right.
I'm not
Okay,
helping,
yeah,
am
I can
Your
see
Worship?
that.
No. I can see I'm not helping here.
No, you are. I'm just thinking of my old phone, and then I was using it for a while just to browse on, but the phone didn't work. I didn't need, because I had a different phone, and then I'm like, oh, the Wi-Fi still works on this. This is interesting.
So it can accept internet from either the cellular service or through your Wi-Fi.
I see. But so in some cases they're combined. Like TELUS, it's sort of combined into the cable, kind of?
No, it's just different products. So they'll
Okay.
bundle. They'll say if you come with us, and everybody does this, you can get your internet and your cell phone and your home phone bill all wrapped up together, but it's still separate technologies.
Got it. Okay, it's still separate. And so one thing we were talking about was the appearance. So why is it that some are just sort of a tall pole now, like it's this pole, and then others, you see designs like trees or there's more branches, and is that just the technology?
It's purely aesthetics.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, so all we need to do actually is get an antenna into the air. So a 3 or 4 foot long, 6-inch wide antenna. It's just how you do that. Sometimes it has to be really, really high. If it has to be really high, that's when you see the bigger structures, the big cable-held monster things. It's because it's 50 or 75 meters in the air, and that's just from a civil engineering perspective what they need to do to get it up there.
That's just anchoring, though. It has nothing to do with the actual.
Exactly.
Okay, got it. All right. Councillor McMath?
I know you guys have that presentation with the tree, and you've done sort of the designing around that before it's gone up. Have you ever done installations after a pole's gone up? Because we have a monopole in the heart of Sooke that is bland, but it's like an open canvas, and so we've had an interesting response back from that company, and I was wondering if you guys have ever done artworks or additions after you've put a pole up.
We just defer to the guys. Do you know?
We haven't done it, but it's something that's feasible. Either wrapping it with some sort of a label, or I knew there was some product, fake bark, that was produced in China, and I remember in Montreal, Rogers got some shipped over, and they simply wrapped the whole monopole with it.
Cool. So Rogers got that wrap stuff from China, and they wrapped the pole.
Yeah. So
well,
it wasn't just a plastic wrap. It was actually some sort of a fake
texture,
probably made of fiberglass or something.
Okay. Yeah, and then having like small additions like to the structure, does that change anything with
Such as
like a logger statue? A bear, putting a fake bear on it.
I guess they should be built structurally enough, sound enough that it wouldn't be an issue. It depends. I would assume if it's a bear leaning on it or a bear halfway up, perhaps it would be more difficult. But there's a lot of creativity that can be done.
Yeah, absolutely. Heck no. And you guys, when you do that, you guys foot the bill for that. Like you've never put it on a city to pay for additions. Yeah. Okay, great. Thank you.
Councillor Beddoes?
Well, first, just an observation. I mean, when it comes to the federal government's regulations, there is a great deal of lack of trust when anything the federal government puts on. I was a radiation safety officer, ionizing and non-ionizing radiation, and they changed the rules on us so many times that I had a hard time convincing people. I don't have a problem with cell phone towers and the amount of energy that they're putting out. But there is a new European standard. How does that work with it? I heard it mentioned. I don't know what it is. Are you aware of a new European standard which is a much more stringent than what we have in Canada?
I'm not aware of it.
I had it quoted to me a couple of times, and I never took
would,
it any further. But
I think there are several standards.
Yeah.
I know that ours is the most commonly used in the industrialized world.
Okay.
And again, I think what we are trying to do is, knowing that the landscape may shift as more and more data comes in over time, we don't want to be shaving the ice cube. We don't want to be at the edge, which is why when we do our own,
I understood, yeah.
we exceed by as far as we possibly can, just so that there's plenty of room.
Now, with your tower, like the one down here, of course, they have arrays all over it, and I'm not sure what they all are anymore. But you talk about putting a microwave link on it, which is a round disc, I don't know, 36 inches or even smaller. I have no idea what you use these days. Would that pole down at that one that we did particularly like, would that have microwave dishes on it when it's up?
It's not ours, so which tower are you referring to?
The one, what was it called? The one you were talking about, Jeff.
Lynn's Lake.
Lynn's Lake, yeah.
That's the monopine.
Oh, I see.
Yeah.
So if we had one out there, would it have
A microwave,
was it microwave
discs on it, and what sort of arrays would they have on it? It would look like this thing down here, which, I'm not too bothered by it. It's not the prettiest thing, but it is in sort of an industrial area.
And are you referring to the new one at the corner of Wadham's?
Yeah, that's right, yeah. Would it look like that?
We don't know yet. We haven't. We don't have a landlord. But
okay, all right.
What we would do is it would be. So I think the backhaul, which is the microwave side, it can only be done by microwave or fiber.
Yeah.
So if there's fiber in the ground, they always go fiber.
Okay.
But if it's not, it's microwave, which is addition. I think they're quite small now. The ones that I've been seeing. 2 feet.
2 feet.
across.
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, sure. Okay. Thank you.
Just lastly, the province is progressing plans for a section of Highway 14 and a new section of road there. So just with that new alignment happening, I wonder sometimes in that area if that would open up a different location possibility. It's all the actual alignment and all where it's going to go is still being worked out by the ministry, but they've announced it. It's happening. And I don't know if that might open up something for that location.
I don't think it will make it any easier to cover that area.
Okay.
It just kind of is going to straighten out the road a little bit. I think and make it a bit wider. The challenge, of course, is still the hills on either side.
Of course. Okay.
So that's really what the guys have to deal with. But that being said, if there is a spot that we find that we just can't get from the macro sites, the towers, the antennas, then that is where we would look at some smaller pole top type solutions to try to, if there's a 200 or 400 meter gap, we might be able to do that with relative ease.
Okay. And the other comment is that my understanding from our MP, Randall Garrison, is that Shanu or Beecher Bay Nation has very limited cellular coverage for their site. So as you're expanding the network, it may be worthwhile to have a conversation with them. They don't have bus service and they don't have cell service, or what they have is very limited. So that's one thing that if there's a way of it's outside our jurisdiction, of course, but because I'm aware of it, there's just an opportunity to dialogue that would also complete the network for someone that really needs the service there as well.
No, understood. We'll definitely have a look at that.
Yeah. So anyway, I look forward to your return. I think that as you're rolling out, the product here, though, is to find ways just to notify our residents that the service is here and it's happening and they can connect to it. I'll kind of leave it in your capable hands to figure out how to do that. But, if there's, obviously the source, I don't know if they do anything there for services, but I think just for residents to know that there's an option that's more competitive and more affordable would be good. It's just how do you...
In fact, I've got a contractor on contract right now, and her job is to come up with a list of all the ways to get the word out. Quite honestly, I'm the one that's been holding off on advertising in Sooke or getting the word out in Sooke because I don't want people's first experience to be lukewarm. If you're in the right spot, it's amazing, right? There's nobody on the network out here. You can have the fastest speeds you've ever had in your whole life and probably ever will again. But if you're in the wrong spot, which doesn't have to be that far away right now, it's not great. So I really want to wait till we have something we can be proud of, and then be able to say, come. And as you saw from the map, it's really only about 3 months away that I think will be good enough to be able to say we're excited. So,
Okay,
pardon me?
3 months.
Give or take 3 months.
Okay.
Yes, I think 3 months.
Is there anything else you're needing from us at this point?
No, and I do appreciate your time. I think what I missed on was we didn't do this early on, so when council started, kind of blind to this whole thing, and all you saw was an application for a tower, and what is this company, and why is it any different?
Yeah.
So I just really want to make sure that you understand what it is I'm trying to achieve with this, just to put it in perspective, I think. So thank you very
Okay.
much.
We appreciate that, and if you have a way of letting us have a copy of the PowerPoint to have, that would be helpful as well,
Okay.
if you can. Just always
Okay,
ask.
great. Thank you very much.
Perfect. Thank you very much. Okay, thank you. Okay, we'll move on to our next item on tonight's agenda, and that is a presentation from Urban Systems, an update on the Parks and Trails Master Plan. Oh, and welcome. It's Catherine Barris. Hi. Welcome. And you'll just need to turn on the microphone when you're ready, and we can proceed from there. Thank you.
So, Your Worship and Council, it's very nice to be here. I met a few of you when we were out doing various workshops and events, but nice to see you all together and give you an update on where we are with this project. So I'm going to just do a bit of an overview of some of the documents we've looked at, and particularly council priorities and how that relates to this project. Talk about the community engagement we did, the report content and structure, some mapping that we've done, and then a draft vision and objectives. I guess I didn't really say, but it had the title slide. This is the Parks and Trails Master Plan, closely tied at the hip with the Transportation Master Plan. So there are lots of documents, but these are some of the key ones on the right: your official community plan, your old transportation plan, your old Parks and Trails Master Plan, and these give us the foundation, kind of a starting point. The OCP sets the context, and we work within all of that. So how will the Parks and Trails Master Plan allow with your core values and principles? Really well, because it's almost like they could have been written for this project. So effective governance. We have some challenges in governance with particularly parks, having 3 different jurisdictions managing your parks. And so that's something that we'll try to address in this project, at least set a course for the future, if not something that's going to change immediately. Long-term thinking, it's a 20-year horizon that we're using for planning, so definitely looking forward quite a number of years. Environmental leadership, well, parks and trails by their very nature are environmental places, and so it's very important, and we will be looking at how those protect environmental resources and the interrelationship between your environmentally sensitive areas and the lands that you're protecting as parks. Community well-being and safety, there's tons of literature on that and the benefits that parks and trails provide. Yeah, there's actually a whole incredible website called the Benefits Hub. If you're ever interested in looking into it, I can provide the link if you like. But it just has all kinds of great studies that actually show research on the benefits of parks and recreation, and particularly outdoors and nature and all of that. Community vibrancy, a lot of the great events that happen in the community happen in your parks and on your streets, in your plazas. And effective and consistent communication. We were really impressed with the number of people who participated, and so it's clear that your residents are very interested, and it's great that they're willing to dialogue with you, and I think there's lots of opportunity to carry that forward. So the community engagement that we did, the online survey, was open for 2 months. We got over 300 responses to this one. It was kind of a little neck-and-neck competition with transportation for a while, but then an issue arose with them and the Ministry of Transportation, so they got ahead of us, because whenever there's an issue, people will fill out more surveys. But we were happy. We were happy with that number for a community of this size. We had 2 open houses with about 60 people at each one. At the first one, we had 2 workshops, and they were They were great, they were well attended, and the people had really a lot to say, and it was a really good process. So what did we hear? I'm just going to go over the highlights of what we heard from the survey. So we have incredibly high participation. Walk, hike, or jog is almost always top in every community, but 91% is outstanding. That's a very, very high level of participation, very active population. Walking or casual use of parks, 83%, that's really high. Nature, wildlife viewing, 75%. Walking dogs, 62%. And then biking is the next in. So these are the top 5 activities that people participate in within the parks and trails. Highest satisfaction. Location of trails. You'll see trails pop up all the time because it's what people are doing the most and using the most. They have the most to say, whether it's positive or negative. Quality of trails coming out, pretty high. Trees in parks, amount of parkland, and amenities in parks and signage of trails. We're getting lower there in numbers, but generally, it's people are pretty satisfied with what they're getting in parks and trails. What are the lowest satisfaction ratings? Well, the top low one, in other words, the bottom, is access to the water. So 41% of people are saying they're not satisfied with that. 35% are saying they're not satisfied with locations for dogs, which is not surprising. Amenities in parks, also not that high. Winter use opportunities came up, and trees along streets. So you saw trees in parks came out high, trees along streets is coming out low. It's kind of interesting. So what are the top needs? We had a series of maps where people could comment on different needs, and by far the highest need was a need for a new trail. So it just went so far above everything else in terms of what people were marking as an amenity need on these graphic maps that were on the survey. So, natural areas need protection is another one. That one came out a lot in the workshops and at the open houses too, where people were sort of putting things on maps and saying this needs to be protected. Need for washrooms, also pretty significant, which we're seeing in a lot of places as well, because when people are out on trails a lot, then they want their washrooms. So just a few images from the community events that we had. And so what we have done also is we've started to map your Parks and Trails resources with a refreshed look from your old plan. So we've reclassified the parks into what we think will be a more useful tool for you going forwards in terms of planning. So there will be standards for the parks that relate to the type of park that they are, and then also for operations. So these park types will relate to the level of operation intensity that they need. The trails are also classified, and that will relate also to operations, but largely to construction. So what's going to be the trail standard of your major and then intermediate and nature trails, so that it's all super clear. And all of the mapping is being done by one GIS person for parks, trails, and transportation. So by that exercise, we are connected. We're also, just while I'm talking about that, connected, like all of our presentations, we're using the same format. And then once we come to getting into the analysis and mapping, particularly the one where we overlap the most, where we're looking at trails and transportation is looking at bike routes and sidewalks, we're going to sit down and do that together in terms of coming up with the map of where we think your proposed routes should be. So our plan structure, these are also comparable between the two projects. The first part is introduction, what's the context, purpose, talk about the community, what are the benefits and trends for parks and trails, and vision and objectives. And then we will each have our own topics, obviously, for the analysis and recommendations, but we'll lay it out in a similar way. So these are our key topics right now: trails, and in this order because trails came out first, so we're going to put it first. Then parkland, park amenities, It's, people aren't as concerned about parkland as they are about amenities, but it feels like you kind of have to have the land before you can do the amenity, and that's why it's in that order. And then waterfront and environment. So those are our key topics. The implementation section of the report will take all of the recommendations and establish their priority, their phasing, relative costs, and then some kind of system for monitoring so that you can measure how you're doing over time. So this is this is our first crack at the vision and objectives for Parks and Trails Master Plan. So Parks and Trails protect our environment, connect our activities, and support our recreation from the rainforest to the sea. And that is consistent, but yet narrowed down a little bit from your OCP vision. We looked at that as kind of the umbrella for this. The objectives have come right out of all the engagement that we did and what we heard from the community. So high quality parks and amenities for all. We heard a lot about being inclusive. A connected trail system that is linked to regional trails. Parks and trails in future development. A lot of people were talking about the fact that they're not seeing the same level of parkland in some of the new developments, and they want there to be in terms of parks and trails. Access to and along the waterfront to fill that great need that people have. Environmental protection and enhancement. Because that's super important to people too, and connecting the trails and using the environmentally sensitive areas as connectors wherever we can. And then streamlining implementation. I can't say that one's really coming from the community. That one's really coming partly from staff and also just from a professional perspective that it doesn't look efficient to have so many jurisdictions overlapping with each other in terms of the services they're providing. So it would be good to see if you have any comments on these, as we can do that maybe after I finish, which I'm almost done. So what's next? We've pretty much finished. Well, we finished most of our engagement. A few little items keep cropping up to add to the mix, like engagement with youth that I think came up when Dan was here talking about transportation, and so I understand that's been happening. So we now will launch into our intense analysis stage and starting to come up with some recommendations, draft recommendations. The idea is that it goes back to the community in the fall for review. And I think, that's it for the presentation. So happy to talk about any aspect.
Thank you very much for the presentation. I'm curious, on the map where there was the dots that showed sort of the ranking, or I guess the priorities for residents, were those dots where the resident lived or where they would like the amenity?
Where they would like something. So the way it worked was there was a little drop-down menu of 5 different options on each of our maps.
Okay.
And and actually probably those were I can't remember exactly what they were now, but anyway, they could take a drop down that says new trail needed. They click that, and then they click the location where they think it's needed, and they can add a comment.
Okay.
And we even asked them to say how important that was.
Got it.
So there's a lot of depth of detail and information behind those dots.
Yes, indeed. Okay, no, that's very good. The other piece was when the report comes forward with recommendation on trails or existing trails or improvements, does it then sort of say, here's a recommendation on the type of surface treatment? Like, will we see that in the plan, or is that?
We certainly can, because that's what the classification is going to do for us. So the classification system that has different types of trails will talk about the surfaces on each trail. Now, we usually give a range, so that, because depending on the location, they might have to be built differently. But so, for example, the top level trail we're calling a major trail, and that's like the Goose and some of your major, sometimes people call them multi-use trails. And those are your widest trails. Probably most of those are paved, but they could also be a really solid, dense, granular surface. So we're allowing for it to be either. But once we say, okay, this is a proposed route for a major trail, then by definition, it'll follow that standard.
Okay, where I'm going with this is in some areas around Sooke where a developer has put in a trail. Sometimes it's just some sort of gravel, and then there's a sidewalk that it connects to. So the surface treatment ends, and you go from say rocks or something to pavement, and then the rocks spill out over onto the pavement. And I've seen people slip and fall there. So then it's the case of now, the municipality should actually pave in a portion of that because it's because of that. So that's where it would just be helpful to whoever is using the document, whether that's a developer then, this will then be a planning tool and they're planning out their development. This is what we expect to see if you're talking for accessibility of all uses, that then you need to actually pave in a certain portion so that there's a transition to evolve, to prevent that from happening. Because my dad fell twice, my mom won't walk down the road anymore, their neighbors are all telling me the same thing. So clearly there's an identity, and it's because of the scatter of gravel there.
Okay, I think partly what you're talking about is the type of trail.
Yeah.
But it's also the construction of the trail. A really well, properly built gravel trail next to a paved trail, you really shouldn't have that.
Right. So that's where it would just be good to have that language in there, so that it's just becomes, well, here is the standard of trail, and we want people to use them. We want to encourage all modes, all uses, all ages, all access. Then it has to be designed that way, so that all residents are comfortable using that, and then it's not a fight between, say, or disagreement between a developer and staff, or council and the developer, whoever. It's just, this is what we're trying to encourage the use of. Okay. And the other part was, and you may have done this already, but in terms of one of our biggest user groups of the trails are our children. And from what I'm hearing from our schools, all the elementary schools, they spend a lot of time outside exploring the trails. And so the teachers, as they get to know the system more, are taking them here, there, and into different places. So that's one way of getting good feedback to reach that demographic is through the teachers of the schools. And then, of course, the kids bring their parents out to explore these places with them. So it's wonderful that we're having that interaction, and we've done some improvements in some infrastructure that is really catering to the kids because they're the ones that are out there. So it's really exciting.
Yeah, Laura was telling me about that just now, and I think it's awesome that this is what your grade 5 kids are talking about. I don't think that's the case in every community. That you have grade 5 kids talking about nature trails being one of their favorite things.
And it's even younger than that, because the kids that visit from kindergarten, they walk all the way here, and it's quite a trek. And the only one is John Muir and Cecinos. They're a little bit further out, but they explore in those areas, and they would probably come in once a more established, safe network actually existed. Right now, I think that network doesn't exist, so they're in those particular zones. But they certainly go down to the water a lot where they are, and the other schools are a bit more connected in, and they come in. So
that's another place where these two plans will overlap, because I'm pretty sure Safe Routes to School is part of the transportation plan, and so that's overlapping with the nature trails that we're looking at. So,
okay, that's great. Mr. Butterfield.
Just so you know, since our last the TMP presentation, we have had staff go out last week and speak to several classes in the area in a number of schools, so to get that demographic and information from the teachers and the students.
Well, it's fantastic. That's great, because ideally we want to look to engage them through the official community plan process. So this is a good tool because it's something they're familiar with. And that weird last question is, through your time in other communities, do you see colorful bags of dog waste hanging from trees? I don't understand that one at all. I understand sometimes people leaving it on the ground, but seeing it in the trees, I don't get the logic there.
And you're seeing a lot of that?
Well, as I'm about, it's like flung and it's in a tree. And then I've tried to do I can't get it down because of where it sits. And they just hang there until...
You know, I would say that it's very, very common to see it flung to the sides of trails and hung up in shrubs. I can't say I've seen a lot of it in trees. Maybe you have a particular guerrilla group or something that's out doing that. I don't know.
Okay. Curious about that one. Councillor Bateman.
Well, I'll have to keep an eye out for that. I've not seen that myself, but I don't have a dog. And I know a lot of your respondents do have dogs, so that's going to skew your survey results, of course. I'm curious your thoughts on our current Parks and Trails plan, because I'm a big fan of that, and it's got such a short, medium, long-term vision with all sorts of costed out. So how do you feel that plan and those recommendations will dovetail with what you're coming up with?
Well, we asked staff to go through the very laborious process of going through. I mean, there are a lot of recommendations in that plan. And going through those and actually marking for us which have been accomplished, which haven't and they're still relevant, and which haven't and for whatever reason they're not relevant anymore. So we will be scanning through all of that information as part of this.
Have you also been able to utilize the public feedback from that process back in 2009?
Usually we don't do that because the public feedback process turned into the plan. And so usually we're pretty happy looking at the plan, and we did such an extensive feedback process for this one that we feel that's what people are currently thinking. We're more interested in what people are currently thinking than what they were thinking then, because, you know, lots has changed since then. It's quite a long time ago. And so we'll see comments on what were the great needs, but then maybe you've satisfied some of them. So
I always wonder, is 10 years a long time? I always think the Victorian era is a long time. We're really... anyway, I'm 6...
How many 10 years have you had? Many.
I've had 6 decades on this planet.
So only 6, 10 years.
So, okay. So I hope, and I also assume, though, that the public feedback you receive is background to the professional analysis you'll bring through staff. And yeah, good.
Absolutely.
Okay.
It's one of the things feeding in.
Yeah. And also, since I'm at it here, it was good to see where it was difficult to read these maps, I must confess, and I did see a couple of new slides here which I didn't see in tonight's presentation. That's fine, this is your preliminary go-round. Yeah. It was good to see that so many red dots for washrooms were at John Phillips Memorial and Whiff and Spit, these are incoming. And the Dimma Mill Creek connector route is highlighted as well. I'm curious with you had the blow up of John Phillips Memorial, and I saw a lot of red dots, and I think people would like as many as 7 or 8 washrooms in that corridor. Will you the bulk of the red dots, do they show up in one particular spot?
You know, we actually haven't launched into that level of analysis yet. And partly
one I've not seen.
Deliberately not yet because, these are existing amenities, these dots on this map.
Okay.
Yeah.
So
right. We're waiting. We're waiting until we're ready, and then we're going to launch in and do it all.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah.
Councillor Beddoes.
I'm going to talk about dogs for a moment. In your research and talking with people, what was the correlation between those that wanted to have their dogs free, say on the Galloping Goose, as opposed to those that wanted them leashed? Were you able to come up with any sort of comparison there? My concern is I'm very positive on walking your dog off leash on some of those trails. Was there much feedback on people saying that I want those dogs leashed no matter what, or what did you come across?
We didn't hear a lot about people talking about wanting dogs leashed. We hear some of that, and we always do, because not everyone likes dogs. And so we try to come up with a plan that allows for those who love dogs and those who don't love dogs. So, yeah. But it's amazing how much, between dogs and washrooms, That's a lot of the airtime.
But I guess maybe this is a question for staff, but after this, at some point, do we need to have, like, will this come up with more, like, about dogs and what, and because you need, like, if you're training your dog, then you can't have you need to train it to be on and off leash at certain times. So where is a good place to do that? We've heard that, say, the spit has, like a lot of shoreline birds and the like are not nesting anymore because the dogs are so abundant there. But then what? Is that all the time? Is it, so just at some point, and then, where I'm seeing all these bags is at the time where a waste receptacle, like a bear-proof bin, would be a good amenity there to stop that from happening. But then I was at Ella Beach recently, and none of the bags were in the bin. And is it because people didn't know how to open the bin? I don't know. And then they all are there because one person's leaving it there. So, but we need a bear-proof bin in certain areas, so it's just the way it is. So, thoughts on dogs?
To Council and Your Worship, it's our expectation that once the Parks and Trails master planning process is done and we see the level of needs for dog parks, for example, it'll give us the opportunity to then either construct an off-leash dog park and then open up the community parks regulation, which talks on effective control of dogs. There's a whole process that has to happen that isn't covered specifically in a Parks and Trails master plan that we could open and talk about the need for seasonal on-leash in certain parks, the need for off-leash completely all year round in other parks. But it's a huge process that would have to be undertaken. Not huge and insurmountable, but a conversation needs to happen with really great stakeholder engagement.
So that would be after this plan is adopted, then perhaps there'd be a suite of recommendations in policy and what that looks like. Okay. Other comments or questions for our consultant?
Your Worship,
Yes.
I just wanted to say one more thing about the dog bags. Dog bags are a subject of debate in some jurisdictions because of exactly what you're talking about, not necessarily in the trees, but scattered all around.
Yeah.
And, what really bothers me is they're all sold as being environmentally sensitive, but you have to read the fine print. In fact, you can't even find it often. So, for example, the ones that are sold as environmentally friendly at Costco, they're not biodegradable. They're called environmentally friendly, I guess, because you're picking up the poop. But in any case, some jurisdictions are trying to move away from bags and giving them out just because they end up being so spread out all over the place. And when they're free and it's so easily available, sometimes, you do see more of them in the landscape than if people have to bring their own, for example. Or, sometimes even, in smaller parks, you can have shovels and proper bins. Anyway, I'm just saying it's not the only solution. Yeah.
Through Your Worship, it's something we've been considering as staff as well, given the single-use plastic bag bylaw that we are giving out single-use plastic bags. Even though they are biodegradable, they're still microplastics. So even though it's low on the priority list because of the other list of things we have to do, it's something we're considering when it comes to our dog bags. Is there paper options? Are there other things that we could be using, digesters in parks, etc.? So it's on our radar screen, just way out there.
Yeah, no, that's fine. Okay. Anything else from anyone? Okay, well, thank you very much for your time with us today, and we look forward to seeing you again in the fall.
Okay, thank
you.
you.
Thank you. Okay. So our last item on tonight's agenda is the Memorial Plaque Contribution Policy. So this has come back and forth in front of council a number of times, in 2014 and then in 2017. And then in early 2018, it was sent from council over to the SPA committee, Sooke Program of the Arts, that have then come back with a series of recommendations. And so we sort of have something here, and we've received correspondence, and I think it's just something as we move forward is just to be cognizant of people's heart and souls in this matter, as it's a very sensitive one in terms of the best way to proceed. So I'll turn it over to staff just to introduce the item and to share where we're at with this.
Thank you, Your Worship. Thank you for the introduction. That pretty much summarizes how we've gotten to this stage in the discussion. In front of you today is a draft memorial plaque contribution policy that was smithed from feedback from the Sooke program for the arts. They also considered feedback letters from 2017 and early 2018 where impacted citizens or sponsors wrote in their opinions of how the memorial policy should move forward. They also had other input from members of the public who maybe weren't directly impacted as being sponsors for benches. But they also heard from members of the public who wanted to be on Whiff and Spit. That's something that we've forgotten, I think, in this process, is that there is a waiting list or a bunch of people who haven't been put on a waiting list just because they've been told by staff that there's simply no room for additional memorial plaques on benches. So the following report has also suggests to limit the number of memorial items in certain parks, such as Whiff and Spit. It talks to wait lists for sponsors, so if you want to put a bench, what the process is for wait lists, and different types of commemorative items. I guess I should forward through. There we go. So here's the list of resolutions, and tonight we'll hopefully address some of these issues that are outstanding resolutions that have been in front of staff since late 2017. So getting to tonight, as I mentioned, the SPA committee provided recommendations for new policies, so we've drafted one of those for you to look at. We also sent out letters to existing sponsors. We also supplied in those letters the signed copies of the contract, if they did exist on our files. We were able to retrieve all but 2 contracts of 26 for Whiff and Spit. So that was a part of the background where people were concerned that they didn't have contracts, so we were able to find those and send those to the individuals in preparation for this meeting. We also sent letters to people we didn't have contracts for, and we sent letters to those that were on the wait list. So this isn't just for Whiff and Spit, it's for all memorial benches or memorial tributes in the district park system. We also put notices in the local media in case we missed somebody, and we wanted to make sure that we covered all of our bases. Where do I point that? There we go. So the draft policy we'll go through individually in the slides. We'll talk about the use of memorial sculptures at Whiff and Spit, the limit to the number of commemorative items in parks, renewals, wait lists, operational procedures that will help guide decision-making for staff, and fees. Memorial sculpture, it's a really high-demand area at Whiff and Spit. So the thought by the SPA committee and previous council was that a memorial sculpture be placed at the entrance to Whiff and Spit. We did put an RFQ out in, I believe it was May. We didn't get any responses. It was just reposted. And staff has also reached out to purveyors of memorial sculptures as a way to drum up some interest because of the lack of interest in the last time. We hope that there'll be a 200-plus capacity for those memorial plaques so that we can satisfy many citizens. Right now, there's 26 benches. There's 25 or 26 people satisfied, and we have untold numbers that aren't. The second item is limit the number of commemorative items. So currently, Whiff and Spit has place for 26 benches. 4 of them were removed in winter storms this year. We sent letters out to the affected plaque holders. There are 4 official ones in Ed McGregor Park, and the committee was silent on the remainder. So they're suggesting limiting 20 at Whiff and Spit, having 4 remain at Ed McGregor Park, and then silent on the remainder of parks, say the Marine Boardwalk, John Phillips Park. They haven't really been engaged in how many benches to put or commemorative items to put in those areas. The alternative idea that wasn't discussed by the SPA committee is don't permit any memorial plaques to be on any of the benches in any of these parks, but rather rely on the memorial sculpture to affix those plaques. That theory was one that was developed by staff and in conversation with some people who called us in the last week or so, in that it would be more fair, according to some of the feedback, to have no one have a bench. And so that the benches were for everyone to have their picnics with their loved ones, for example, on a particular site. Maybe they had a favorite spot. And keep the memorial sculpture as that touchstone. And so that the plaque would be attached to one space, and then the rest of the benches remain empty and void of plaques. The renewals. Currently, the policy is silent on renewals, and it's not silent by lack of consideration, but rather the SPA committee didn't feel that renewals were a good thing to encourage. That is because of the popularity of Whiff and Spit and Ed McGregor Park. They felt that the popularity required some balance. So the alternative idea is allow renewals with of some cost to be with priority to be given to current sponsors. The other option was to allow many or multiple plaques on commemorative items. Some of the discussions that I had with members of the sponsors suggest that that would be an okay second item. And then that other idea, don't allow any memorial plaques to be affixed on any of the assets other than memorial sculptures. The next item for conversation was wait lists. So, for example, if we have 25 expired benches in Whiff and Spit, and so what happens when we open up those 20 benches, perhaps, to the public for donation to put a memorial plaque on those benches? How do we handle the wait list? We have 3 or 4 people on an ad hoc wait list. Maybe there's going to be 20 or 30 people that are going to come in the door, and how do we handle that? So the operational policy or operational procedure, we need to have really good guidance on how you would like us to handle that wait list, because it's going to be an administrative challenge for us that could be potentially decades long, especially if the tenure remains at 10 years for a bench. And so there's some suggestions in the report on how to handle that. The operational procedure is how staff implement the policy on your behalf. The process for contribution, the application form is in that. The sponsor declaration, that's the contract that people have signed in the past, what that would look like. The memorial plaque information, including the size and the print and the wording, the policy that goes around that. The types of commemorative items, whether those be picnic benches, or picnic tables, or regular benches. Lands and specific locations for commemorative items on Whiff and, say, for example, on Whiff and Spit, where you would like to see them or where you would not like to see them. And as I mentioned, that wait list process. And then the fees. Nothing is cheap anymore. And for example, just to create a brass plaque, as we currently do, is just shy of $200. So a brass plaque, metals are expensive to have those cast. That's just to create the plaque at the foundry, not to mention the administration of receiving, from a staff perspective, receiving that plaque, making sure the wording's right, doing the site visits with people. So that's why we're suggesting that a $750 cost for perpetuity for a brass plaque on one of these structures would be something that's reasonable. And then items 1, 2, and 3, different prices. All of those are up for negotiation or for approval by council. But it's important to note that we will then have to amend the fees bylaw at the end once those numbers are come across. It is suggested that staff can bring you different ideas for memorial benches for Whiff and Spit and other locations to give you an idea of the style and the costs. Then you can then decide exactly the prices that you're willing to proceed with. Now, these numbers don't apply necessarily. Items 1 and 2 don't apply if you choose not to have any of those memorial plaques affixed to benches at any of the locations. It could just be the straight cost of some number for a memorial plaque on memorial sculpture. So that pretty much summarizes what you're seeing in your policy and how we got to the policy that you have in front of you, the draft policy. We really need guidelines for those citizens to participate in a memorial program. It's important, I didn't mention on the inset, when in the past people have made a contribution to a memorial program, they do receive a tax contribution receipt. So they're not buying a bench, but rather receiving a tax receipt for a donation to a program. So that's something I think that has been missed in a lot of the conversations we've had. In this situation, we will still have to check with staff to determine if that memorial, this contribution, is a tax deduction. I'm not sure if it is. So I don't know if anybody here has that answer. So that's something, if we choose to move down that road, we have to make sure that we are legally able to give a tax receipt or not. That was just a little ad hoc thing. So in summary, we were guided by Sooke Spa, public input to date, and we have a pretty well thought out policy that we've put out in front of you, and we're happy to hear any information that you would like us to go back to the drawing board for. Thanks.
Okay, thank you very much, Ms. Hooper. Councillor Beddoes.
Yeah, just a quick question. On those original contracts, you said you found 20 of them, or out of 24 or something, some number like that. Did they have a specific time and how long those plaques or benches were to be done? You there?
Through your worship to Councillor Beddoes, yes, they all did. So every contract and every iteration of the donation program, and I can pass them all out to you, the application form remained unchanged through all the different policies, even as far as CPark. The signature block, or item 2, for example, said length of tenure of the bench, 10 years. And then very shortly thereafter, a few inches away, was that person's signature. Now, in fairness, when we did talk to people who had signed those documents, you can imagine they're going through the grieving process, and perhaps if you didn't go through that document line by line as a staff member with the bereaved person, they may have missed that. And but every contract, every policy has always had a 10-year.
It's interesting because some of the letters that are upset with this process are that they thought they bought the bench forever. And it's interesting that you actually have a contract that said 10 years, whether, unfortunately, whether they saw it or not, you're quite correct in the grieving. The other thing is, I just want to comment how thorough you've been on this process. I very much appreciate all the thought that's gone in it. We have some decisions to make, but you laid out a pretty good path on how to get there. So thank you very much for that.
Okay. Other questions or comments from councillors? Councillor Bateman.
All right, thank you for the report. And I was going to bring up the whole grandfathered issue, but if indeed it was 10 years from the get-go, then so be it. So that's good. What else was I going to suggest? There was, in the previous policy in 2014, there's this clause 3.223. Should donors desire, they may donate and pay for in advance up to 3 consecutive terms. And this might be for elderly people without descendants who can keep the thing moving. If they can pay in advance for a longer term, that might be something you'd want to consider. I noted I Googled, of course, and out in Whistler, they have first right of refusal on a renewed bench. So if any of our current individuals, if indeed we decide to stay with this plaques on benches, they would have the first right of refusal. And this has been, in my Googling, I found, in the city of Richmond made a gross error and did not have a renewal date. So in Richmond, those who bought their plaques in the 1990s, that created quite a hullabaloo. Mm-hmm. And I noted in Digby, Nova Scotia, they currently have a policy which has no renewal date, so one day they will have some issues, undoubtedly. The final thing I wanted to mention was I looked at parks, BC Parks. Now in BC Parks, you can sponsor benches, bike racks, picnic tables, water fountains, playgrounds. So I'm wondering if a playground, for example, $70,000. But maybe there's someone out there in the community who would like to donate a playground to the district. So possibly this memorial policy could be fleshed out further in time. Of course, not immediately, but yeah. Okay. $200 for that plaque. That's remarkable.
Yeah.
Because I went on to Googling, of course, to trophy companies, and for like $15 you can get a nice little plaque, which probably would not stand up to any salt water or, yeah, okay, and peel off. Okay, thanks.
Councillor Beddoes?
Yeah, the other thing that you said, staff brought it up about, all plaques to be on the sculpture, not on the benches. I really like that idea. That treats everybody the same. Those people that have a plaque on a bench right now, the offer to put it on to the sculpture free of charge, I think that would go a long way. You're never going to make everybody happy. You're dealing with deceased loved ones, and let me tell you, it's a powder keg. But unfortunately, somebody has to tackle it, and I guess it's you guys through us. So, but I really like that idea. I think that would solve a lot of our problems. So, thanks again.
Councillor McMath?
Also, maybe we could give them the original so that they could have a memento, just so there is some recognition of that, because I imagine I would feel the same way as they do right now, even though their signature is right beside that date. Like you said, when you're bereaved, you are not concerned with that at all. You just want to hold on to what you can. This is right out of left field, but there is, in Art Morris Park, there's the circle with a mosaic that's disintegrated. And so what if, instead of looking for an art installation, it was perhaps the current plaques that are out there could also go in there and then stay forever? Just as another idea.
Are you thinking of the Ed McGregor?
Sorry,
mosaic?
thank you. Yes, Ed McGregor. Yeah.
The only challenge with that location is that the tree roots are a contributing cause of the mosaic bubbling up. I don't know that I would want someone walking on it. But it's a good idea. It's a thought, but I mean, part of it.
It's okay. I'll never have an idea again.
No, I'm just.
Through your worship, Councillor McMath, that it is a good idea, but we do have to worry about root heave and consider what people would think of from a respect level, whether that would be an appropriate thing. There's also a lot of rock walls in Ed McGregor Park that would really receive these plaques very well, so we don't think we would need another memorial structure there. We could use existing structures and create a lovely space.
Thank you, everyone. Part of the challenge, though, that I see is that we're reading this now that someone made a donation to a inventory of park assets. So whether it was $1,000 or $1,500 or $2,000 or $500, whatever it was, because we're reading it from a policy perspective. But our residents, and it may not be the person who is even grieving, it could have been a friend or someone that came in and organized it all, gathered some funds, I'll handle the admin, it could have been the executor, who then came in and signed off and made the arrangements, and then the family gathers together when the bench is there. So it's more the sense that it wasn't, oh, by the way, this, in the speech that we made this donation to the district. And that's all handled by an executor. It's the case of, here is a bench to remember so-and-so from. So it's more, it's the item, it's more, it's the bench piece. I think now going forward, it's a little bit different because, there's different language, but it's still always going to be difficult because who came in the door to deal with the paperwork is different than who, I think, is gathering and receiving the benefit. And that's why there's a bit of a disconnect, and it's around And this really came to light a few years ago because some of the benches have fallen apart. Like they're just not safe for public use anymore because of the rust and the wear and tear, and they're gone. So then the concern was that, well, what if family is visiting and they go to pay they might not have been in Sooke in the last 5 years or 10 years, and they go, well, let's go on, walk on a spit and say a prayer for so-and-so, and then the bench isn't there. So that's what, staff had a concern of that and said, okay, I think we need to let people know that this has happened. So that's where, I struggle a bit with this 10-year time frame. And then I think one of the recommendations from the committee anyways was, you can take your bench home. Well, if you have someone that's moved into a condo or that's not necessarily possible to do. Like how are you going to pick it up? How are you going to remove it? How are you going to carry it? And then you feel compelled, well, I have to take it because it's going to be recycled or disposed of, which would be even worse. So it's just that part I see didn't go into the policy. Maybe it's just because how is that possible? I don't know. Part of me wonders, well, what if the bench just remains until... nothing in a marine environment, nothing lasts. So then when the bench is just not usable anymore, because it is a public park, so there's people, jumping on them, there's vandalism, there's all of those things, and there's the wind and the rain and everything that takes it away, that when it's the case is that the bench remains in place until it cannot be there anymore, and then it's retired. Then the plaque goes on the memorial wall, as opposed to unscrewing plaques and putting new ones on. That doesn't resonate well with me at all. I struggle with that quite a bit. That, it's the plaques that are changing. It's and I think in the case where, because some of the benches are very unique, and so I sometimes wondered, did so-and-so make this bench and then bring it here? Because some of them definitely look custom made to me, or maybe there was just design differences over time. So there's that piece. So that's where I kind of like the idea of, sharing a bench. So if somebody new wanted one on and then the family's agreeable, then there could be another plaque added to it, perhaps because the park is full. But just recycling, taking the plaque off and putting a new one on, I just struggle with that piece. Well, it isn't, right? And I don't know that, we're at this point now because the spit has become more and more popular, and because it's one of our most popular parks, it's one of our most accessible parks. So naturally, that's in itself a draw for the use there. Some of our other parks would deeply benefit for having some more infrastructure in them, but they're just not accessible, or there's no parking. There's just challenges that get people to them, right? So that will change over time as our parks and trails become more heavily used. But for this one, the split just has a lot of meaning, and people have their celebration of life and a scatter, all of that happens there. And whether you're allowed to do that or not, I don't know, but it happens because of that reason. So that's where it's just moving. Okay, your 10 years is up, and it's. But I get it was a donation to the infrastructure as opposed to you bought this bench, and if you take your bench home, it's just a little bit, it just feels a bit insensitive to me. And then not allowing anyone on them, at first I thought, okay, well, that could be fair, but in some ways, people don't vandalize, not all, some don't vandalize when there is a sentimental attachment to it. Some still will all the time. You see destruction in graveyards and the like, and that happens, but for the most part, most people are pretty sensitive about it when it's it was in memorial to somebody, right? So in some ways, I think if the sculpture was in place, then I think it gives, and I think we need to just keep bidding on it or not bidding on it, but having it there until it's there, because then I think when someone sees that, okay, that would look nice, but right now you go there and there's nothing. So then I think you'd be more likely to hold on to what you have because you don't know what's coming. In the picture, it's still just a picture. The item physically doesn't exist. And you could say, well, what if council doesn't want to do it and changes their mind? and takes it away, then that's not even an option. So in some ways, I think, before, like, the sculpture has to be there, and then people, okay, well, I'd like to be on it then, because I see it, and it's lovely. So some rambling thoughts. What do you think about that? The 10-year piece. I'd like to hear from others, like, if the bench is fallen apart, it's one thing. A new one has to go in. So then I could see how perhaps, okay, this bench is in a state, it's not savable, you know, we need to put in a new one, but to just take a plaque off and on again? Thoughts?
You asked it?
dive.
Okay.
Al, no, you first.
Well, thank you very much. Whatever the mayor recognizes, I just...
Go ahead, Councillor Beddoes. Even though I was looking at Councillor Bateman.
Well, you can. I don't have a problem with that. I go back to those original contracts, and I don't want to be a hard nose about it, but and I know it's a very sensitive issue, but they were there for a length of time, and if that time's up, I don't ever get the impression that anybody actually bought the bench to take home at the end of their 10 years, and I don't know. I have my mother has a plaque down on Dallas Road there, and you know, if there would be a time, then that might have to come off. It's been there for a good long time. But I just think that's a wonderful compromise to say to somebody, and again, I agree with you, it's easier to sell when this big rock is down there with all the plaques on. But I'm a very sensitive guy, and I would welcome that, an opportunity to move off the bench to that plaque. You're still honoring that, the one that's passed. So I kind of really like that idea. Probably a lot of feedback from the community. There's going to be people unhappy, but you know, it's not forever. I mean, you can't. Even those benches aren't forever. Down in that spit, that's a rough part of the world to put anything. Even that rock is going to have a hard time in a storm. So yeah, I kind of like the proposal. I think we'll certainly get some unhappy. I looked through the letters again while we were talking, and the people are certainly the ones that have written in are under the impression that they have this forever. And that certainly, I'm glad you found those contracts. And we have to find a very sensitive way to bring that to their attention because it is such a sensitive issue. But yeah, I think you're on the right track. I understand. It's a no-win situation in some aspects, but I think the solution's at hand. I think you got it.
Councillor Bateman, then Logans.
Well, I'll agree. I don't believe that we sold the bench to the sponsor. The sponsor for the 10-year period, we're given the right to have the plaque there. I think in being sensitive, I'm not in favor of this idea of removing all plaques from the benches. I think it would be nice to be able to offer people the right to renew, have first refusal. And I know I've spoken to one of the current sponsors, and she and her husband would be happy to see another plaque or two alongside their own, which would be a way to, and they would need to renew as well for that bench. And this, of course, would raise a little extra money. At the same time, with those multiple plaques on benches, if that's the route we choose to go, we could also have this memorial stone. And I'm curious, as a question through you, how many do we have on the wait list at the moment?
Through your worship to Councillor Bateman, the wait list wasn't well established historically, but since we were directed to establish a wait list in January of 2018, 3 people have come forward and filled out the application.
Yes.
Several people have called and chosen not to put it on the wait list just because because of the uncertainty.
And if a memorial stone shows up at the Whiff and Spit parking lot, yes, I'm sure numbers will rise dramatically. Okay, so do we need to be making some motions tonight to council? Wait.
Yes, but we do have members of the public here, so I don't
okay.
want to entertain a motion until, like, you could just keep it in mind and then just have a bit more of a dialogue, because we would refer up to council, but we do have some, would like to do that checking with the public. Councillor McMath? Oh, pardon me, Councillor Logan's, then McMath.
I've been quiet all night, so I understand. All right, so thank you very much for the report. I know that a lot of time and effort and thought and heart has gone into it. A few comments. One on the 10 years. I think it is a very sensitive topic, and it's something that I would support moving forward, giving first right of refusal to, of course, the benches that are already, or the plaques that are already purchased. If we thought of, if we were starting this fresh and didn't have a memorial bench policy at all, we would probably all agree that the 10-year would work, I think, right? So it's just a matter of managing that expectation with those who have already purchased them and trying to find a way to make it a bit easier to understand moving forward, so that when we do have people, because that's an excellent point about the executors coming or friends coming, they may, even if they hear that it's 10 years, they may not pass that information on to the family, for instance. So finding a way to communicate that better moving forward would be something that we could do as part of this process as well. But I did also like what Councillor Bateman said about having that option. Was it something we had in the past, or it was something another community had where they could purchase 3?
That was a
3.
You mean three plaques on a single bench?
No. 3 periods.
Oh yeah, I think that was Oak Bay.
Okay, yeah. Possibly. That was us. Oh, Ms. Super saying it's us. Yeah, so that I think would be a good option as well, because then they could renew for a longer period of time, up to 30 years at a time. So I think that's kind of a nice way to do it as well. And I do agree that if those who are on the current benches or on a future bench are agreeable to having others on it, that's a good way to share it as well, although I'm not sure what the fee structure might look like for that, but that's something we can look at when we review the fee options as well. I did like the fee options. Perhaps we need to add on to it, though, if we're doing multiple plaques on a bench. As for the wait list, I like the first come, first serve to be added to the wait list, and then given a number of days. I think that's the most fair way to do it. If we do it by a draw, I mean, someone could have passed away 10 years ago and never get the draw, and then someone who did a week ago gets the draw, right? So I do like that way better. And let me see. That's in there. One question I have through you to staff. I have a friend who has a memorial bench in Edmonton, and his bench has a picture on it. Is it possible that the plaques either on the rocks or on the benches could also have plaques if there was pictures, like color pictures, if there was an additional fee?
Through your worship, currently, as we do the cast bronze, that's not something that's available, but anything's possible should you wish that to be possible as part of the policy. We currently do not allow birth and death dates as part of the policy because of personal information, etc. So it's something that we would have to look into from a legal perspective as well.
Right. Okay, thank you. That's all for me.
Councillor McMath?
Yeah, spot on by Councillor Logan's. And I know you touched on that if the bench, disintegrates or comes apart, then their term would be over. But I think that it should just be with a specific date, because if someone, vandalizes one bench and doesn't another, that's not fair to that family.
And just a question there, I guess the location could vary the lifespan of the bench depending on where it's situated and how much wind or wave exposure it gets at the same time. That's fair.
That's a fair statement to make, Your Worship. Currently, there's about 4 different styles of benches on Whiff and Spit, and those that are on the Sooke Bay side have been really hammered in recent years, and they are not doing well. As I mentioned, 4 or 5 have been removed just this year alone. But rather the other ones on the inside or on the harbor side are a different construction, and they're going to last through an atomic blast, I'm pretty sure. So staff had come up with the idea that because we have an inconsistent style out there, it looks, from our perspective, a little haphazard, because benches styles have changed over the years. The thought was, as a sort of a way to move forward with whatever council decides, is to instill a new bench style using the existing funds that we have in the memorial dedication GL, and put an entire new set of benches out to the limit that council decides, say that's 20, in locations that are less likely to be taken out by the elements. And then at that stage, should council decide to allow people to the right of first refusal or several plaques, etc., there's a new bench and a new path forward. And it might be something that would be more palatable to everyone. So we could take those plaques off, for example, all of the benches, and put them on the sculpture, or start fresh and put those new ones, those existing ones, back on those benches, just to clean up the site as well.
Okay, and just further to that, like with the benches on the bay side, like some of them, it's been a while since I've been to the spit, but some are in a needed location that even if there is tremendous wear and tear, I'd say it's either a good viewpoint, or like I think of some family visit, like that's as far as my father-in-law can go, and he needs to sit there. And so the last time, and it's kind of the stretch down and then you kind of turn, I think. It's sort of there was no bench there, so then he just had to go back to, like there's no bench right now, so you need to go back. So that's where I think even if the elements are harsh, there is still a need for placement. It just means that we have to replace that bench sooner because of what it's exposed to, but that's better than no bench at all, because I think the infrastructure has to exist there.
Your Worship, I agree with you. That's
Yeah.
how we've decided to place a lot of those benches, based on abilities and knowing that people can only make it so far regardless
Yeah.
of their age. Another thing to note is that there are no picnic tables down on Whiff and Spit, and there's no place to sit maybe with your easel and do art. And there's all sorts of different types of assets we could put out on Whiff and Spit if we weren't restricted by 26 memorial area benches. And I don't mean that in a negative way, but right now we have those assets. They're to be maintained in that site because of the memorial donation. But we could have a more diverse asset plan out there if we were to, once this is resolved.
Okay.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, I do, and that's where I would like to see that we don't put a limit on it, because there is a need. There is a need for picnic tables, and and then further in the end, as we do some sort of whiff and spit plan, there may be a call for some other amenities we haven't even thought about yet. But a picnic table, is one that certainly comes to mind, and not just at the far end, because not everyone, you need to have other areas that people can get to. Like they're just. You're using the driftwood right now, or trying to figure something out because you can't get down to the end. So I think that's important there, is that there isn't a limit for that reason.
And, Your Worship, we also have to consider the environmental sensitivity of the site,
Yeah.
the nesting birds. There are
Yep.
red and blue listed species at risk. So it's a balance that we
It
have
is.
to strike between sustainability and community amenities.
Yeah, absolutely. But I think that number then will hash it, like taking all that into consideration. What do we need and what are we trying to protect? And here's where we're at. And it doesn't necessarily have to be a bench if you thought of a picnic table or this or that. Yeah. Okay. We have some members of the public here. Is there any comment that you would like to make to council tonight on this?
I have to think about that.
So nothing formal right now? Yourself, sir? Okay, just thought I'd ask. Okay, thank you very much, though. Okay, so moving to move forward then, there were some thoughts here from members of council. So I guess one thought then is, or one question I have is, hypothetically, we don't have a bench right now in a place where we need to put in a bench, so council approves a new design to go there. And then what? Is it the case then that because then procedurally for staff, there's a new bench coming in, then do we reach out to both someone on the wait list and someone who had that location and say, hey, there's a new bench, we can put you both on here? or?
Your Worship, administratively, if we ask, just talking about numbers of plaques on one bench, if we're asking for permission from the current sponsor to put a second one on that bench, it might become an administrative arduous process.
Right.
So we just have to think about those sorts of things so when it comes to that situation.
So with the benches, this is another question then, did people select a location then for each specific one?
Through your worship, yes. Before the Parks and Environmental Services was formed, Sooke and Park had a contractor that did that. Mrs. Carol Russell from Small and Russell, the architect, would go to each individual site and select those locations. And then as the program developed and I came on staff, we will go out with individuals onto the marine boardwalk and find the right spot and hear the family story, et cetera, as we do it. So it's a very important part of the process.
Okay. And so sometimes was it because that location needed a bench, or is there a connection to that location sometimes? Both, maybe?
It's both.
Okay.
Staff would sometimes suggest, say, if it was full, we would suggest they go down to the marine boardwalk and give some ideas of where would be great. And the family would then say, well, Dad really liked boats. So we would maybe do it more towards where you could see a boat from that spot.
Okay, that's nice. Okay. Councillor Bateman.
I think Councillor McMahon.
I'm recognizing you.
Okay.
Then
Good.
McMahon.
Well, my suggestion in moving forward is that we look at the areas in which the policy is currently silent. So it's renewals and wait lists to get us rolling here. So renewals being first. And we seem to have been offered 3 alternatives. Permit renewals for a fee as deemed appropriate by council. Allow existing memorial policy to remain in place. Anyway, do I need to read these out? Probably not. Do not permit any MP on a CI.
Memorial plaques on a commemorative item.
Right.
Right.
So that was Councillor Beddoes. You thought that might be a good idea, and perhaps it is a good idea.
Okay. No, thank you for framing this, Councillor Bateman.
Yeah.
I appreciate it.
Okay.
I'll go to Councillor McMath, and then let's talk about the renewal part. Or did you have a comment?
No, I'm ready to move.
You're good? Okay. So on the renewals, there's the 3. So looking for, unless someone thinks of a 4th, on sort of your thoughts or observations so far on those 3 on renewals. Permit the renewal as a fee, allow one to remain add more. I kind of like number 2 myself.
What page is that, please?
This is page...
Scrolling through, trying to...
18.
Page 2.
Oh.
2 of 18.
Or it's page 18 of
18 of
45.
45.
I'm sorry, I should spell it here. Thanks.
Okay. Are we on different pages?
Well, I was waiting.
I'm on page 2.
It took me a while to get back.
You're on page
I'm at 18 of 45, and that's page 2 of the
Okay,
policy,
yes. Page 2 of the policy, okay.
of the report.
We're on the same part, okay. Okay, thoughts on renewals? Councillor Logans.
I think that permitting the renewals for a fee is a bit tricky, but I like allowing the remaining ones, or the existing ones to remain, but for the term that we decide. So if it's a 10-year, we just kind of start. So it's like a free renewal. Yeah. And then that way everyone's on the same page. No one has to pay another fee. I'm not sure how that works in terms of what that would cost the district, but that would be my preference.
So to clarify, it would be like as of, say, July 2019, the 10 years starts for everybody. Okay.
Yes, that was kind of what I was thinking, is that we kind of start it fresh. Those who
Yeah.
are already in place remain in place for the period we decide, say it's 10 years, and then after that, permit renewals happen for a fee, and we just find a better way of communicating that to everyone going forward.
Okay. So then it would be the case for the wait list then, is then the wait list could see, okay, you could be on a bench with another party, Like for somebody new that wants to come on?
I think that's another discussion.
Okay, we'll start with this one
But in terms of the wait list,
Yeah.
I think it's a matter of collecting the names, doing first come, first serve, and then they have the option of going on to the new memorial plaque and avoiding the wait list, so they can just skip on to the, but if they want to do a bench, then yes, it would be a matter of waiting that period out. And it may be the case where some of the benches are fine to move to memorial as well. We don't know, but we might also want to install new benches in other parks.
Yeah.
So I think there'll be options.
Okay, so what does everyone think about that point? Councillor Beddoes?
I like the idea of starting the clock over
Yeah.
again. There's so much confusion about these old contracts. If we do start the clock and give it 10 years, I would like to have it limited for renewals, that they're allowed maybe one renewal for another 10 years. I wouldn't want to see it to go on and on and on and on. I'd like to see some sort of limit on that. But in the short term, I certainly have no problem with starting the clock and let it run out.
Well, I think it's just to start with the renewal, because the council in 9 years could change the whole thing again. And then, so by saying no renewals after this, sort of you could just see it changing, and then that would be repealed, and then it would be just as confusing, potentially.
But I guess for the part that, if, for instance, in 7 years that bench is wiped out by a storm,
Yeah.
are we obligated to change that bench, or can we move that plaque to the memorial rock or whatever we're doing? So there's some complications there. I mean, these benches aren't designed to last forever. Some on the inside will, but some of the others certainly will not.
Through your worship to Councillor Beddoes, it's important to point out that 4 benches have been removed this year alone. So we have 26 plaques and now 22 or less benches. So how do we cope with that if we're allowing those renewals to just happen automatically? That's a question for you.
So in that case, I guess, right, because that's sort of what I had in mind, is what about then those, say, 4 plaques or 5, let's just say. So what about those? So in that case, if a new bench is installed, then they could go on with someone on the wait list, like, because their bench has fallen apart. So then now, like, what do you put the plaque on? So if there's the wall, it can go to the wall. In some cases, we need to have a bench in certain areas. So then who goes onto that bench? Councillor McMath?
There's 2 things. So there's the infrastructure piece, which the district should be taking care of, period.
Yeah.
And then there's the plaque piece, which is separate. And so the benches that are out should be replaced, period.
Yes.
And then the people where there's confusion and the things that we've touched on before, they should be giving the first choice for a freebie, a fresh start.
For 10 years.
But let them know that they will be joined by additional plaques. And it's not an option. It's just that they will come, and then that will basically decimate the wait list. And then for everyone else, once this goes out and it's talked more, I'm sure you'll get more interest, more people coming in. There's the opportunity to have their name on a wait list for the 10 years, or as benches open up in different parks, as more infrastructure is included, like the Trails and Parks Master Plan that's coming.
Well, even John Phillips needs...
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
they do.
Really needs some benches.
Yeah,
right
and
now.
then the timeline is the 10 years is the 10 years. So if the bench goes, they stay. We replace the bench.
Because the bench has to. I mean, it wouldn't be fair if someone went down and I don't know, burned one.
What is the lifespan of the benches that you're selecting?
Anywhere from 10 to 20 years, depending. We're expecting that we're going to offer to you a concrete and wood combination so that there isn't anything rusting on the structure other than bolts. And then it gives us the opportunity, if in the rare event that there's vandalism, we can refurbish the wood with our in-house skills and staff. So that's what we're hoping, as opposed to the current plastic and metal ones that aren't nearly as comfortable and attractive, but they last forever.
What's the price point on the ones that you're hoping for?
They're about $1,500 to $1,800, but we'll come back to council with a report for that selection of that item.
Thank you.
I like that, Councillor McMath. Councillor Beddoes?
Yeah, to simplify things, if we gave people the clock ticking now for 10 years, and that at the end of the 10 years, no renewal, that's when they have to go to the stone. I think in the end, rather than trying to work this magic of putting 2, 3 other plaques on thing and getting people all upset again, if we just have a policy, we're going to put that big sculpture, that's going to cost us some money. Then the people that have a bench now, they got it for 10 years. And that's going to satisfy, hopefully that will satisfy them. And with that knowledge is saying at the end of that 10 years, that plaque will be transferred to the stone at no cost to you. I think that might be the best way to go. Other than that, you're going to run into a nightmare of administrating this thing. Sometimes keep it simple, stupid is the best way to go. And I'm leaning. I like. There's a wonderful idea of starting the clock again, and at the end of 10 years. And I understand the council could come and change it all again, and that's the nature of the business we're in. But I would think that council could see the problems of changing it all over again. Maybe not. Maybe I'm naive in that respect. But I'd like to see us go that way, and that way I think we honor the people that are affected by this now, and the fact that we're putting this big stone there and all these on it, I think that's where we want to go anyways. I think my feeling is with the arts people as well, that was the original intent, was to get them off of the benches. Benches are our responsibility to put in the parks. And the memorials, well, that's another thing. We've got a place where people can honor the ones that passed. And I think it's pretty damn nice what is proposed. Let's not overcomplicate this thing. Let's just give them a 10-year grace period, and poof, they're on the stone. So,
Okay.
and
So,
we'll blame some of the younger members of council because God knows where I'll be in 10 years.
on the
stone.
wall.
Yeah, I got my spot.
You
I got
have
my
that
spot
one
all
open,
picked up.
wide open. Okay, so just so I'm clear, we'll get the stone rolling.
Yes.
Because I think that's important that it's there.
Roll it away.
It's very important, right? And then all benches will fresh date unless there's any that they're all past 10 years old, right? Or is there any that have 3 years remaining? Just to throw another hurdle at you.
Your Worship, they're all expired except for one, and that one that is currently valid, or maybe I'm wrong. I've worked here for far too long, apparently, if I can remember. No, just give me 2 seconds.
Oh, right, but it would still be...
Nope.
They're only going to get more time anyway.
Yeah.
Well, I was just thinking that if you
Susan
were
Percival.
only
No, it's
7,
Percival.
in year 7 of your 10 years, then you should get 13.
No.
Okay. I'm overthinking this now. Councillor Logans? Right.
Your Worship, I just found it. So there is one bench that was donated in 2011, so it has a few more years left, so it would expire in 2021. But
Okay.
the remainder of the benches, all of which there are 25, some of them have been on since 1999, most of them from early 2000, so they've already been there for nearly 15 to 20 years.
Okay, so in this case, it'll be, so everyone gets 10 years, say July 1st onwards, just for a date, for 10 years, and then we will install the benches as we need to, as parts of park infrastructure, hopefully with that new design. And then the plaques, the plaques that have no bench, then do we ask the family, do you want to go onto the wall, or do you want to pick it up, or do you want it on a new bench with a waitlisted person? Is that...
Not the last part that you said. It's at the end of those 10 years, they can have the option to take the plaque or transition to the wall for no cost.
I know, but right
And
now
then-
we have some plaques without benches. So where do those plaques go?
How long till we can replace the benches?
Depending on whether, Your Worship, you decide to limit the number of benches on Whiff and Spit, it could be up if you do limit them, then some of those plaques will not have a bench home. So they would need to go immediately to the memorial wall. If you choose not to limit the number of benches and put 26 back in place, then all plaques will have a home.
Including the waitlisted
No, not including the 3
okay.
waitlisted.
Okay.
So that we're down 4 benches right now?
Currently we are, because they were wiped out in the weather.
And remind me how much they are each?
About $2,000. The cost can be covered currently using the existing GL. Where all this money for benches has gone in, there's about a $19,000 balance, so that we have the money to replace a lot.
So let's replace the benches, put those people out, restart the clock for 10 years. At the end of that term, they go to the wall or they take their plaque.
Okay. So what about those that are on the wait list? Do they wait 10 years?
That's the conversation. So
Okay.
you can tell the people we are meeting them halfway in the sense that some of the feedback we received is they're unclear on, they thought they had it forever.
Yeah.
etc. So we will extend it for 10 years, but there will also be an addition of a secondary plaque next to theirs for the people that are in recognition of the people that are on the wait list right now.
On the new benches only, I think, right? Right. Councillor Beddoes, or Councillor Logans and Beddoes.
Thank you. I like the idea of just letting everyone know that there will be the potential for having other plaques on the benches, not making it an option, just this is the way it is, because that will remove the wait list and also provide a lot more opportunity for others to come forward, and then that way we're not worried about it. With that in place, though, I don't think there's a need to just say, okay, you're off the bench in 10 years and you're not allowed back on. I don't agree with that, actually, and I would prefer to see that they can renew it so that they could be there again and again if they wanted to. That's the part I can't support.
Councillor Beddoes.
I don't think I even had my hand up.
Oh, okay, I thought you did.
Let's take this opportunity. No.
Okay, so, I agree with Councillor Logans there that over time, the spit might change. We have had some dialogue with the Sooke about a vision of what the spit could and did look like once upon a time. And we may, it would be awesome if we realized that vision and looked into how it changed. We've also heard how nature has its own way of forcing a channel through it. So with that in mind, I think it's on the expertise of our park staff to identify the location that is appropriate, and if there's nesting birds and the like, okay, here ideally is the best fit of benches and where can they can be with this known. Here's some ideal areas for picnic tables. And then it's the case of we put on the benches and or picnic table as we can with the funds that we have, and then we put all the benches on, but just let families know where the plaques are located, and that, yes, now this, and it may shake out that with all the commemorative items that the spit has room for, say, 25. Maybe that's the number, and I'm just throwing that out there. So that's where over time, if you want to be, this will allow other people to add to benches in a location that suits them, or they have the wall. What do you think about that? Does that work? Because we don't know what that number is. We do want to consider the environmental impact, the weather elements, where there's a need for one. So we'll have that report come to us once we give staff that direction, and then there's that. Councillor Beddoes?
Yeah, again, I think it's getting too convoluted. As far as I'm concerned, if those people on the waiting list, they're offered a spot on the wall or the rock, whatever we're going to have down there. And after 10 years, everybody. I think we need to get away from having these benches dedicated to people. I'm all in favor of benches out there, but that's why we're going to go for this very large stone down there. So that's to take the place of the benches. No. And well, that's how I feel about it. I mean, whether you say no or not, that's really up to you. But I think that's the best spot for them, and get away from having these plaques on benches. I don't think it's the way to go.
Okay, thank you for sharing your opinion. I don't agree. I know, but that's good. It's good that we have diversity. I'm with Councillor Logans on this one. Councillor Bateman?
So it's at times like this, and there have been many over the last number of months, where I miss Councillor Parkinson, who would be here to give us, and she'd undoubtedly remind us that it was suggested by SPA that the number of benches at Whiff and Spit be limited to 20. Because I believe that the logic there is, unless you limit it to 20, there's not going to be motion and movement towards that memorial wall. And I guess the question is, and this was through you to staff, that replacing the benches that vanished in the storms, will they not just again be under assault, or will you find fresh places for these benches?
Through your worship, it depends on the season. The Spit and Mother Nature are always changing and throwing things differently at us. The 4 benches that were hit this year have never been assaulted before. So who knows? So we have to be flexible and nimble when it comes to replacing these benches and placing them in the first place. I will echo what you're saying in the spirit of the original policy, is that if we allow multiple memorial plaques on benches, then the need for the memorial sculpture may become moot. For example, if we allow 2 or 5 or 10 plaques on a bench, then there will be no need for a memorial sculpture, because everybody will be satisfied for a while on that. No, you don't think? So that's just a risk. I'll point that out.
I just disagree, because it depends. It's more affordable to go onto the wall. And for some, depending, that'll be the furthest point they'll be able to walk to. They won't even be able to walk to a different bench. And it's not easy to push a wheelchair or even a stroller on the Spit. So that's why the location of this was important, to have it near the entryway so it doesn't become difficult for people to get to. And for some, like at the end, they may not want to be on a bench at a further down, because family, like from an accessibility point, it might be better to be closer. For that reason, that's where things change, and it's also more affordable. So I think it's just more appealing to have that. And there's some maybe where it's newer, where you want to sit and reflect and connect with someone that you've lost, which you may not want to do at a busy area where there's a lot of people near an entry point. You might want to be a little bit further out for that ability to contemplate. And I have heard that our cemetery we may run out of some room there, so there's another case of where then, that'll be sort of an OCP question in terms of looking at more lands and where do we have that. So then in this case, having options that are available, I think, are important. So I think that's where we can see what that looks like. Councillor Logans?
Just to quickly follow up on your point, you're right, it is a different target. It's a different different option for people, which is why I completely disagree that we are moving people off of benches onto the memorial artwork, because they are different price points, they're different purposes, so having those options for people is important. And also, we don't have a memorial plaque or a place to put a memorial plaque now. And we may not for quite some time, because it depends on whether or not we have an artist to do that. So we have to address the issue that we have at hand with the benches, regardless.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor McMath, did you have your hand up?
Sometimes we're very similar and sometimes we're very different. Tonight we're similar. We sent out the request and we got 0 responses. So in the interim, let's open up space on the benches. And then if they can't walk that far, or if they don't want it, then they can wait until that installation comes in. But in the meantime, let's reset the clock, put multiples out. Let's go. Let's replace the benches. We've got the money.
And then just further to Councillor Bateman's point, as our staff said, the areas change as the Spit changes, but in some cases, even if the bench only lasts 5 years, there's a need to have a bench there from a mobility perspective. So, and that's just something we're just going to have to replace and update all the time, but it's a needed amenity for that reason. It's just the area will expose it, but the bench still needs to exist. Councillor Logans?
When we're voting for this motion, I'm just looking at how it's being written. I cannot support the no option for renewal, so I won't be voting in favor of that piece of the motion. Is there a way that we can separate these out for discussion
See, none of this has been
regular
moved
council?
yet.
No,
So,
I understand.
yeah.
I'm just anticipating that.
Yeah.
I'm thinking if we can split them up for.
Yep.
Excuse me,
Okay.
through Your Worship, those are just options for council to consider. That's not the way that it's written.
on it, and I'll vote against it.
No, there's two different motions there. The first one would be with an option to renew for however many years, or to make the motion with no option to renew. Those are two separate motions. They're just typed in there for options right now, and then we'll remove whichever one you don't want to proceed with.
Thank you for clarifying.
Okay, sir, Councillor.
Well, I'd like to add to this piece with another option is to the first right of refusal on a renewal. Would that not be also
Option to renew.
Yes. Oh, with an option to renew. Okay.
Option, first right of
Yeah.
refusal.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's it.
But that language should be
Yeah.
there.
Okay.
In the policy.
Yeah.
Over to microphone 1.
Thank you, Council and Your Worship.
It's tricky.
I just wanted to, the original motion that we put in the report was to basically have Council, or the committee, to recommend to Council to adopt the Memorial Plaque Contribution Policy, which you see before you. And I just wanted to mention that in regards to some of these choices, the way that it's been written out, if you look at item 2C, it says that the memorial plaques will be affixed to and remain on the commemorative item for a maximum of 10 years, at which time the plaque will either be returned to the sponsor or placed on the memorial sculpture, depending on their choice at the time of the application. And if after the application they didn't make that choice, and then 10 years later they decide that they would like to put it on the bench, the way this has been written is that the sponsor must reapply then to have it reaffixed to a commemorative item, i.e. being a bench or a picnic table. And in cases where there's damage to the memorial plaque or damage to the bench, then there'll be other options that could be proposed, as mentioned in item E.
At the discretion. Yeah.
Okay. So, Ms. Machado.
Sorry, I'm getting the sense that we've got a number of changes that are being proposed here, and I don't think that the policy is going to be in a place where we're ready to actually recommend adoption. For 2E, I was getting the sense that we might want to add some wording that we will reserve the right not to replace unsafe, damaged, etc., but that we will move the plaque to a different location in cooperation with the sponsor. I think item 4B, I think Council's heading in a different direction, that they would be added to the wait list at the end of the 10-year term. So I think some of these sections need to be reworded, and that we would want to bring this back to Council, which could be as soon as, well, we'll get it done for next Monday, but certainly by the time we break for summer, we could take what Council's providing as feedback tonight and then bring a final version of this forward to a regular meeting.
Okay, no, that works. I'm comfortable with that. So then, in terms of tonight, what resolutions? What are we? It was there were a few things that we wanted, and they're not on the screen anymore. Oh, there we go. Okay, so this is where there's some amendments here. So, okay. So So this is where I think we can break them up or look at an option here. So let's just discuss it first. So the first committee of the whole recommend that council direct staff to amend as follows. Renewals allow existing memorial plaques to remain in place for a 10-year period commencing July 2019. So we should probably
keep that,
and then we can add the date in when we adopt the policy. Let's make that. So we could do that, right? Okay, so that'll be, because I think it should have a specific date, not just July, but maybe it's July 15th. Okay, so
Your Worship, can we clarify that that is to be no cost to the sponsor?
Yes.
Okay.
At no cost to the sponsor. Yeah.
To the current, yes.
At no cost for current sponsors.
The period of grace.
Yes.
It's a lovely expression, which is what we're offering.
Okay, so should we move that one first, and so we can move that one? Moved by Councillor McMath. So discussion on this one. So this, we're all clear, 10 years for all sponsors, no cost as of July, whatever date.
Excellent.
Okay, all those in favor? Opposed? It's carried unanimously. So the next part then is whether there's an option to renew or no option to renew. That's where there's a difference there. So if there's an option, then like another 10 years, decade goes by pretty fast.
Then it's consistent.
Yeah, and then it's just consistent, and we're not getting into 3s and 5s and 7s, like it's 10, 10, 10, 10. So for another 10 years. So this is where it would either be an option to renew for another 10 years, or there's no option, plaques to be moved to the sculpture at the end or returned to the sponsor. Councillor Beddoes?
Yeah, I guess with this, I certainly would like to have Councillor Parkinson's input on this. She was very much in favor of this memorial sculpture.
Yep.
And my impression, and it's just mine, I may not be right with this, is her intent, and she was really pushing this, was the second option there. And that is to eventually get everything moved to that sculpture. That was the purpose of the sculpture. I know there's some discussion with it about different people wanting different things. So on that option, if we're going to postpone some of these other things, I'd like to postpone that one until we can see if Councillor Parkinson is able to attend or is able to give some feedback, because she's a very important person when it comes to this art stuff, and I personally rely on her to give me advice on this. So I would not like to see us move ahead with that portion of it until it comes back from staff in 2 weeks or so, and maybe and hopefully Councillor Parkinson could be part of that discussion. If not, I would certainly hope she'd be well enough to send some sort of indication where she stands on that. I think she's just a fairly big mover, yes? Or,
I think we have some feedback here.
Through your worship, it was very clear that the SPA committee and Councillor Parkinson, in their development of this, they did not want the option for renewal. That was very clear in their instructions. But, of course, it is the decision of council.
So my understanding also, and it may or may not be completely correct, is that it also was so that others could go on to a bench. Like, and that you would start to see that movement, so that anyone on a bench now goes to the sculpture, and then that opens up the bench for anyone that's on the wait list. But yeah, it would have, yeah. Councillor McMath?
Oh, sorry.
So if the whole idea is for like the statue to allow for new people to come and use the benches, then, and we're already having trouble getting an artist to create that right now, why don't we do multiple plaques on the bench to eradicate that wait list? We'll restore the benches, and then you want to keep it simple, that's pretty simple. And then they can renew if they want to, they can stay out that bench, and then as the community grows and more people are interested, then later on, when there's more money, we can also look at that stone feature. But for right now,
we do have the funds for the stone, like it's come through the SPA collection. It's just getting somebody to
right,
bid
which
on
we're already
it.
struggling, right?
Yeah.
So to nix the wait list, having multiple plaques on the benches will solve that right now.
It would, right? And I think that's where the memorial wall was scheduled to be done in 2014. And then there was never any movement on it, and the policy pointed towards it, and that was our problem when they're off. And then where do you put them, right? So, you know, and I totally appreciate the work of the committee. I just think people need options in life, Councillor, and no, you cannot be on the bench. Like I think you just need an option there. And I think if you were on the bench for 10 years and another 10, maybe by the end of that, you'll shift somewhere else. It just depends, right? Councillor Logans?
No, I completely agree. The benches and the stone are two different price points. They're different markets. And by adding additional plaques to the benches, we're solving part of the problem. The piece of artwork is not going to go unused by any means. It's going to be another option that allows more people to have Whiff and Spit as an accessible price point for them to have a memorial.
Yeah.
So it opens it up to more people, really. And if we completely take the plaques off of the benches and kick everyone onto the memorial stone, what happens when the stone fills up? Then we're going to put people back on, like it just goes back and forth. So we need to have those options for people. And as much as I respect the committee and Councillor Parkinson, I'm not Councillor Parkinson, and I'm going to vote how I feel is the right way to vote in this matter.
Councillor Beddoes?
I don't want to go on about this too much longer, but, we task a committee to go out and make recommendations, and that's what the SPA committee did. And they came back with a pretty good recommendation, and now we got these people to look at this in depth, and this is what they came up. And now we're changing so many aspects of it. Again, I'd just feel better if we not tabled it, but postponed it for a couple of weeks and get a little bit more input from that group.
Councillor McMath?
But it's just a recommendation from a group of people, and so you take that into account, and then you make a decision based off what you would like to see. So it's not, you don't get a recommendation and then do exactly what they say. Like, that's not the function of this group. So exactly, it's a friendly amendment, if you will. So I don't, tabling it doesn't make any sense to me. You have the information, what do you feel you would like to see? And then you make your choice based off that.
Okay, so we have options. We have an option to renew for another 10 year with fees defined at time of renewal, no option to renew, plaques to remove, or we can table this part of it or postpone this part of the discussion. So I'll look for someone to make a motion. Councillor Logans.
Well, there's no point tabling it because we're in committee of the whole, so we can bring it back to discussion at a regular council meeting, but I'll move that there's an option to renew.
So the first part, with an option to renew for another 10 years with fees defined at time of renewal. That's been moved. Okay, so we're in committee of the whole. So discussion on that. Any pieces there? Okay, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? Councillor Beddoes is opposed, so that carries. And then the other part here is all existing and new benches allow for a maximum of, okay, so how many? 3? Yeah. 3's a crowd? 2's company?
Your Worship, along the top of a bench, you could probably fit easily 3 to 5 plaques, and then, of course, you'd have to go on the bottom, start going down lower on the back of the bench. So we'd recommend only if that top row.
Yeah.
3 to 5, I think. So 5 would be a logistic possibility.
Councillor Logans.
If we do maximum of 5, then I'm sure staff would balance things out as things, right?
Yeah.
We're not, it'll take us a long time to max out of 5.
Okay, no, that would make sense. And then, yeah, maximum of 5. All existing and new benches allow for a maximum of 5 plaques, current and future sponsors to be informed that multiple plaques may be affixed to benches. Moved by Councillor McMath. Discussion? All those in favor? Opposed? Councillor Beddoes is opposed. And I think that's Councillor Bateman?
I think one of our corporate officer mentioned that staff could take our wide-ranging discussion here and summarize it to a degree, and when you come forward with your next iteration of this to council. Yeah.
Yep.
So that's unstated.
And then the other pieces, though, were about amendments on the wait list. We've talked about the options for a wait list that it would just be as first come, first serve, or a lottery draw, but I'm sensing that everyone is sort of first come, first serve. And the number of commemorative items in the parks, I think that needs to be,
Staff recommendation depending on the park.
well, part of it, you know, there has been a need for Whiff and Spit to have its own park study and plan done, which I think is very important. And I think that's where, like, I think it's a bit early to suggest this, because I know that the committee had said that no more than 20, but in some areas, from an accessibility standpoint, you need a bench there, or some people, like there needs to be that there. So if we went with the 20, that means that some places where we need a bench aren't going to have some because we've kept it off. So I wonder if that part on the number, it's just a bit early, I think.
Your Worship, we do intend to come to develop an operational plan for this policy. So in that, we can bring a report back to Council saying this is where staff feels benches are sustainable. We'll talk about how, like, trip time and how much people are able to get to these different places. And we can bring to you a proposal of those locations of the benches and picnic tables and other assets in a future council. That will help you have an informed decision on how many benches would really fit.
Yeah,
Okay.
that sounds great. Yeah, and thank you for grabbing the picnic table piece too.
Through your worship, the other one that I had was to amend 3E. That talks about the district having the right to not replace any damaged benches, but we were going to add language giving the district the ability to move a plaque to a different location.
Yes, that makes sense.
And then once that is resolved, I would also ask council to make a recommendation asking staff to look into the feasibility of using the existing walls at Ed McGregor Park for a memorial wall.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So,
And just also
Councillor McMahon?
on that piece, so if the bench is no longer sustainable in a certain position, that their timeline still be honored.
Oh, yes, I think the timeline always has to be honored, even if the bench doesn't make it to that point. Yeah, completely. I think that's clear. Yeah. Okay, so on this part here, so some further motions then would be that council directs staff to amend the proposed memorial plaque contribution policy as follows, with a wait list on a first come, first served. Do that one. Is someone prepared to move that? Moved by Councillor McMath. Any discussion on the wait list? First come, first served basis. Okay. All those in favor? Opposed? That's carried unanimously. The next one is the replacement. The district reserves the right to move plaques to alternate locations should bench or commemorative item, put the CI, no longer be sustainable in the current location, in its current location. Do we have a mover for that? Moved by Councillor Bateman. Any discussion there? All those in favor? Opposed? That's carried unanimously. And that staff be directed to examine the feasibility of using the stone wall at Ed McGregor Park for memorial plaques. Is that the one that had the blue glass in it? Okay. Moved by Councillor Logans. And any discussion there?
Yeah, I'm curious if the SPA committee did they offer that idea forward? Yeah.
I think Ms. Hooper was there for those discussions on.
I'm sorry.
With the Ed McGregor Park memorial wall possibility, was the SPA committee?
No, through your worship, through to Councillor Bateman. No, that wasn't discussed. They primarily focused on the whiff and spit possibility, and that was something that staff had come up with.
Yeah, and the focus was more on whiff and spit, so I can see that. Okay. So I'll call the question on the Ed McGregor piece. All those in favor? Opposed? That's carried unanimously. And was there one more? Okay, and that council directs staff to draft an operational procedure that examines possible locations for commemorative items on whiff and spit.
No. Just whiff and spit? Not all the other parts?
Well, this is going to formalize our, like, the number and location so that everyone is clear on that. So, yeah, The other parks aren't full yet, except for Ed McGregor. Ms. Machada?
Thank you, Your Worship. I think we have one more motion just to ensure that we've captured everything Council was talking about tonight, and that is to amend the policy to direct staff, to include that damaged items will be replaced, whether at that current location or another, but that the items will be replaced and the plaque put on that new item.
As close as we can.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. Okay, so we'll do this one first, that damaged commemorative items be replaced at the district's cost.
As soon as possible.
So, okay, moved by Councillor Bateman for discussion. So this would be something that goes in, a brand new picnic table, it's vandalized.
It's almost there. It's just the language is to, it just puts us like in a corner. So if as the spit changes, it's not feasible to have that bench there.
That's in the top one. So that one we've moved where the commemorate, alternate locations part.
No, let her finish. Different direction.
Okay. Sorry, Councillor McMahon.
That's okay.
I think, are you talking about are you trying to say in the case where it's a damage from a natural cause or circumstances outside of our control and not just taken out because of planning issues or what have you?
Kind of. Just give me a second.
Okay.
It's just it has to be limited. It's just too open-ended from a cost perspective for me. I'm not comfortable with that line.
So, Councillor Bateman?
Well, I'd like to recommend that line include if it is of intrinsic value to the users of the spit, i.e. these benches that are closer to the parking lot that are essential, because those who make it to the end are quite happy sitting on driftwood.
Yeah.
Right? So, something, I don't know. That deals with not spending all this money all in one.
I didn't think that was necessarily where Council was heading earlier. I thought that what was discussed was that if we have 26 benches and 2 of them get knocked out in a storm, that we will replace those 2, so that we again have a total of 26, but not necessarily at the exact location of the original, but that we would commit to the sponsor to replace that bench at a more suitable location if that's what's needed. That was what we were trying to get at with this particular motion, if that was Council's intent.
Yes.
Yeah, that's my understanding. It's the case of in some areas there's a need for a bench and the elements, it might not have the same lifespan because of where it is, but we need the infrastructure. So if it's brand new and it only lasts 4 years and the plaque is there for 10, then a new bench will go in, but that person who put it there won't have to pay for another bench because their plaque is still for 10 years, and maybe the location will shift a bit better, as we know. If part of the spit falls apart, it may not be able to go there. It physically has to shift inwards a little bit, but that we would replace that and not at the sponsor's cost.
That's pretty good.
Yeah, operationally feasible.
Came up with that.
Oh, good. That damaged commemorative items be replaced at the district's cost if operationally feasible. Okay, good. So that was moved by Councillor Bateman, but is that, you're amenable to that?
I'm that friendly amendment.
Yes, okay.
Yes,
that's friendly. Councillor Logans?
Yes, because right now we're just talking about benches, but if we were talking about a $70,000 play structure, it would be a bit of a challenge. Okay. So yes, this is supportable.
Yeah. Gotcha. Thank you. Okay, so that's great. Okay, so any questions about that? All those in favor? Opposed?
Oh, I was in favor.
Okay, I can't see you now.
My hand up.
Okay, That's carried unanimously. And then the last one was, okay, this one here. The council directs staff to draft an operational procedure that examines possible locations for commemorative items on Whiff and Spit. Moved by Councillor McMath. Anything else? All those in favor? Opposed? It's carried unanimously. Okay, good work, everyone, and thank you very much for staff for all of that, and the committee as well. And motion to adjourn by Councillor McMath. And all those in favor? Opposed? It's carried unanimously.